protection board up. So I'm live. So we're going to read the contents, title page, copyright, dedication, preface. First book, or first tale. First tale is called Endless Christmas. The preface. Christmas is the most magical time of the year. There's just a special charge in the air as we move into the season of joy and giving. December is my favorite month. Mine too. Christmas is my favorite holiday, and Santa Claus is one of my absolute favorite things in life. Some people have claimed that I love Santa a little too much, especially since I'm 44 years old. I've since written letters to the North Pole identifying those people so Santa can take whatever actions he deemed appropriate against them. Well, I'm 46 years of age, and Aaron, there is nothing wrong with loving Santa Claus. I say to everybody that I'm his cousin. And when my divorce finally goes through, I will be known as Jaximus Frosty Claus in the state of Minnesota. So what that means is that in the state of Minnesota, I am going to be Jaximus Frosty Claus, and I am going to be playing Kamo Klauz until I die. So I'm going to keep reading the preface. I'll tell you all this because the following stories, with the exception of Sleigh Ride, there's 5 stories that are in this book, are rather non-traditional Christmas stories. If you're familiar with any of my short stories, then you know that I like absurd, mayhem, strangeness, and comedic violence. And there's a lot of that in this book. I'm also writing a book. I'm writing the Jaximus the Berserker story, which is basically 15 books or 15 or 20 different stories inside of it that have basically violence, chaos. Basically, it's the Jaximus the Berserker story, the Claus Chronicles, or the Claus Saga. I'm actually writing it on ChatGPT. I'm going to put pictures and logos and stuff inside of it, and basically it all ends up being now to next year for 2026, and after the ball drops, basically I'm going to be the rise of the Jaximus. So Jaximus Frosty Claus is going to be taken over. So, comedic violence, and there's a lot of that in this book, and I stand by every word of it. For the record, Christmas and all of its characters and its traditions is a perfect playground for imagination, and I imagine some wild stuff with these stories. But the last thing I wanted to do is give the impression that I didn't love Christmas, for all of this season stands for. So before you dive into these stories ahead, I want to wish you and yours a very merry holiday season, and I pray that you experience joy and peace in the days ahead. Now, on to the Endless Christmas. Love, Aaron Hall. Well, we love you too, Aaron. So, Christmas Day, 6 days away. Endless Christmas, story number 1. There was an art form to being invisible, and John Worthy was a master. His ability to hold a position and remain undiscovered was legendary. A skill he first learned as a Special Forces scout sniper. John had since put it into use to survival and bringing down some of the world's most dangerous people as he hunkered down once again, covered in sand and snow. This meant 2 things were true. The man looking for him was in the Nubian desert, would never find him. John was going to kill whoever this person was. By chance alone, the man was getting closer. John didn't mind. It just made his job easier. He was buried in the side of the sand dune, which in turn was buried under several feet of snow. Only his eyes were uncovered. He took long, slow breaths, keeping his heart rate slow to a crawl. His muscles tensed as the man drew closer. A freak snowstorm had been raging across Sudan for the past 8 days, and could see this interloper shivering under several layers of clothing. It meant his opportunities flexes and would be dulled and slowed as the man moved within grappling range. John almost pitted him almost. In an explosion of sand and snow, John leaped from his buried position. He saw the man's eyes go wide with surprise as John came crashing down onto him. He ripped the man he ripped the man to the ground, and in an instant he had the tip of his combat knife pressed against the man's neck, drawing a bead of blood. Friendly, stand down, friendly, the man shouted. The words made John more suspicious. The only friendless in the area were the men on his team. This guy certainly wasn't one of them. Operational code, John yelled, pulling the knife a little further and slow serious he was. 765-112-38901. That's yesterday's code, John said, twisting the knife a bit, drawing more blood from the man's neck. No, 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 it's not, the man yelled, fear creeping into his voice. That was yesterday's code then, John asked. 98727-227-15. I know that's right. John was almost convinced, but the codes couldn't be discovered, and he wasn't ready to relent yet. Tell me today's code, John demanded. 765. Backwards, John yelled, twisting the knife again, drawing another bead of blood. Give it to me backwards. The man hesitated for a moment, then he spoke, his voice racing. 109-832-11567. John relaxed, pulling the knife back a few inches but keeping it pointed at the man's neck. You agency? John asked. The man shook his head. Lane Williams, D.C. D.C.? That explains why you look so out of your depth, John said. I got a shelter nearby. We can talk. John stood, pulling his coat tight, then turned and walked away. Lane got his feet and followed, trying to shield his face from the harsh freezing winds. A few minutes later, they reached the makeshift shelter dug into the backside of a dune. The shelter contained a small cot, a stool, and a crate of supplies. John took off a few layers of clothes, then sat down on the cot. He motioned for Lane to sit on the stool. The man sat, then tentatively touched his neck, checking his fingers to see the blood. You cut me, Lane said. I've done a lot worse to people who've traveled this part of the desert. Didn't they tell you what this place is? Lane nodded. Some sort of pass-through is for anyone looking to stay off the radar, he said. The locals call it a creek, Al Aswad, a black path, John said. A lot of nasty stuff has come through this part of the desert. A lot of bodies buried underneath these dunes. John dug through some of the items for food at the foot of his cot, then tossed a small rag to Lane. Put some pressure on the wound for a minute. The bleeding will stop. Lane did as he was told. So, are you here to explain how my desert op has somehow become a snow op? John asked. This desert has had less than an inch of snow in the last 2 decades, and now all of a sudden it's been a blizzard conditions for the last week straight. Lane looked slightly uncomfortable. He shifted on the stool, then locked his eyes on John. I'm here to tell you that this op is being shut down. You're needed elsewhere. John leaned forward. Anger boiled inside him. He'd been involved with the military and the government operation for well over a decade. He was no stranger to seeing plans changed and missions altered due to whims for those he held political power. But he was not going to let that happen to this operation. He pointed his fingers angrily at Lane. I've spent 13 months in the desert, identifying and tracking what all the boys back at the Pentagon agree is the single most dangerous terrorist organization in the world today. My team is finally ready to strike, and you're telling me that DC wants to pull me off? Lane nodded slowly. That's what I'm telling you. John was seething. He took a moment to calm himself before he spoke again. Why? He asked, though clenching his teeth. There's something else. There's something else that happened. Something dangerous. John shot to his feet. So much for a calm down. He took a step closer, looming over Lane now. These guys have killed thousands. They've got the material to make dirty bombs. I've got photos showing that they're actively making them. What could possibly be so dangerous that they would have to give me this up? Lane swallowed hard. He removed a rag from his neck, no longer concerned with the bleeding. He looked up at John and shocked at the depth of the terror and he saw in the man's eyes, as if he was haunted by the words he was about to speak. It's Santa Claus. Christmas Day. Thump. THUMP, not Trump. Thump. Thump to whack. Thump, thump, thump. Lee was breathing heavy, lines of sweat running down her face and dripping onto the floor as she moved into a slow circle around the heavy bag banging it in her garage. Her punches were calculated and powerful. Single blows, two-hit combinations, three straight rights, all of the devastating moves that she'd been drilling since she was young. The chains that held the heavy bag creaked loudly as it swung. Her muscles burned in the best way. She threw a kick, then an elbow, then returned her punch combination. A small shelf nearby held a few relics that reminded her of her past. A picture of her in an octagon being lifted up in the air by her trainer and her coach. Beside it, right in the middle of the shelf, was a mixed martial arts bantamweight championship title. She she relinquished it, not lost it, and they allowed her to keep the original belt. One other picture was her on the shelf. It was taken by a photojournalist in the late rounds of her first championship fight. It had been one of her ferocious fights as she was clear from the state of face in the photo. Two streams of blood ran down her face from a nasty cut above her eye. Her mouth was open, the picture catching her mid-scream. Blood and spit was flying from her mouth. Her eyes blazed with fierce intensity. She knocked out her opponent a few seconds later. It was the night she learned the nickname the Lady Killer. The shelf was all she kept to remind herself of her former glory. Glory she intended to capture again. No one thought she had it in her. Her old trainer, the Fight League, the current generation of fighters, the press. None of them. She let herself remember all the things that were being said about her since she announced her intentions of making a comeback. Too old. Thwack. She let the negative comments power her. Washed up. Thump quack. Overrated. Thump thump thump. Her lungs were burning. The timer she'd set for the end of her practice had gone off 10 minutes ago. She forced herself to drop her hands. Getting injured due to the overworking would just prove all of her doubters right. There was something she couldn't do, but still, even though she was getting late, she was reluctant to leave the garage behind. Here in this small space, she was in control. Once she left the garage, it was back to her real life and the many complexities and the challenges it brought. She took deep breaths, then stepped over in front of the full body mirror in the garage. She stared at a fierce woman in the reflection, reminding herself just who she was. She was Leah the Lady Killer Osborne, afraid of no challenges. Inside the octagon or out of it, no matter how daunting they sometimes were, she wiped herself down with a towel and then picked her water bottle and left the garage. The door led into the kitchen, and then she saw the clock displaying on the oven. She let out a squeal, suddenly feeling like a little girl. It was 12:30 a.m., which meant something very important. It's Christmas, she said excitedly. Leah couldn't help like childlike energy that surged through her, nor did she want to. Christmas Day was her absolute favorite day. She ran up the stairs, feeling the need to share her excitement with someone. Her daughter's bedroom was right up top the stairs, and she swung the door open. Rosie, it's. She stopped mid silence to see that Rosie was already fully asleep. Leah frowned. For so many years, her daughter had been her Christmas buddy. They tried to stay up and wait for Santa together while eating treats and watching Christmas movies. But the last few years, Rosie had seemed less and less interested. Leah still wanted her to see her little girl there in that bed, but this 12-year-old preteen had taken her place. Closing the door behind her, Leah rushed towards the master bedroom. Her husband, Mark, wasn't wild about Christmas as she was, but he was always willing to indulge her. He smiled on her face, slowly slipped away as she came into the room. Mark was asleep too. She felt silly for expecting him to be awake. He slept almost all the time these days. The TV was on without sound, playing an old Christmas movie. The room was silent except for the rhythmic whoosh of Mark's oxygen machine and the steady beeping of his heart monitor. Leah walked over to the hospital bed. It was in the center of the room where their old bed used to be. Beside it was a recliner where she slept most of the nights. Leah stared down at her husband. She tried to recall the fierce reflection of herself seen down in the garage just minutes or two ago. She never felt very fierce when she watched Mark sleep. He'd lost so much weight since he got sick. He barely resembled the man she fell in love with all those years. The doctors kept saying that he only had a few months to live, but here they are 3 years later, still proving them wrong. She squeezed his hand gently, checked the machine, and reassured that everything was working properly. Leah left the room and went back downstairs. No matter how tough life got, Leah stayed true to her Christmas traditions. Santa wasn't some mythical figure to her. As an orphan, he became a huge part of her life. If he hadn't made time to sit with her one Christmas morning when she was 10 years old on that path, she doubted she would live past the age of 18. Santa was the first positive male role model in her life. Even though she'd only talked to him a few times since then, she never forgot how much he'd done for her. And so she found herself in the kitchen, preparing her special treat to leave for Santa. She loaded ingredients into the blender, then dropped a scoop of protein powder. Another mom scoop leave milk and cookies. But she knew that delivering gifts worldwide was hard, and Santa needed more sugar and complex carbohydrates. But he needed creatine. That's funny. He needs creatine and protein. She blended the shake and then poured it into an extra large mug. She sat at the small end of the table in the living room along with a few pouches of energy gel. She smiled as she looked at it, pleased with herself. Heading back up the stairs, Leah made the decision, even without her daughter, she was going to stay up and wait for Santa. With blizzard-like conditions sweeping across the area, she stopped by and chat, but the thought of the sent a thrill of excitement through her. She could use a visit from the big guy, even if it was brief. No one could encourage her like he could. Going back into her bedroom, she changed out of her workout clothes and into the warmest Christmas pajamas. A new Christmas movie just started on the TV. It was one of her favorites. She crawled into a recliner, pulled a blanket over herself. She didn't want to chance waking up Mark, so instead of turning on the captions, she kept the TV muted. He groaned quietly and shifted, and then his hand reached out. He did that often in his sleep, reaching out for her. She took his hand gently into hers. It seemed to settle, then slipped back into her better Christmas when they'd lay awake together in bed watching Christmas movies. She shifted in her chair so that she could lean against Mark, trying to ignore the tubes and hoses. It was only a few minutes later when her eyelids felt heavy and her lofty plans of staying up late until Santa arrived gave way to her need to sleep. Thump. Leah's eyes shot open. She was monumentally between a dream and reality. In the dream, she had been up in the first round, her comeback MMA fight. She caught her opponent with a vicious uppercut that connected with a thump and then knocked the poor woman out cold. But it was a dream, faded into her bedroom, came across focus. Another one thought Another thought came into her mind. Had the thump been real life? What if it was Santa's sleigh landing on the roof? Leah exactly grabbed her cell phone and checked the time. She felt the touch of disappointment when she saw it was almost 6 in the morning. Well, after then, after when Santa would have came to deliver presents, her hopes of seeing him were dashed. But that monumentary letdown was quickly replaced by excitement. She threw the blanket off of herself and then got to her feet. She rushed out into the hallway and took a few steps down the hall, just enough to get a view of the Christmas tree. There were presents everywhere. It looked like the mug full of protein was empty. Her face lit up with a bright smile. She turned around and rushed into Rosie's room, flinging open the door so hard it hit the wall. "Rosie, get up!" Leah yelled. "Santa came." Rosie answered with her eyes remaining closed. Leah ran over to the bed and shook her daughter. "Santa was here. He brought presents," Leah said. Rosie's eyes slowly slid half open. She didn't seem thrilled, but Leah didn't care. She grabbed Rosie and started pulling her out of bed. This is what people need when they get up for Christmas. "Come on, it's Christmas Day," Leah said. "Okay, Mom. I can stand up on my own," Rosie complained. Leah stepped back, giving her daughter space. As soon as Rosie was out of the bed and on her feet, Leah looked at her and ran for the door. "Let's see what he brought," Leah yelled, dragging her daughter behind her. Leah skipped down the stairs into the living room. Just as she suspected, Santa had drunk all of the protein shake, and both pouches of energy gel were gone. "That's a lot of presents," Rosie said. Leah smiled and nodded. "Santa always looked after them. Get in there, Rosie. Most of them are for you," Leah said. Rosie smiled and she knelt down by the tree and started sorting through the presents. There was that little girl who loved Christmas, Leah thought, smiling wider as she watched her daughter, as she watched the excitement of Christmas morning light on her daughter. Rosie tore open the large presents and shouted for joy when she saw the purse inside. "Mom, it's exactly what I wanted. The one that's been sold out for months," Rosie said. Leah nodded, her heart full. Rosie opened another gift. It was a new case for her cell phone. Rosie made a sour face as she looked at it. She held it up and looked back at her mom. "This had to be you. Santa wouldn't bring me something so lame," Rosie said. Trying not to be offended, Leah responded, "Santa's not the only one who has to pay to get your screen fixed every time you drop your phone," Leah said. "I got it in your favorite color." That was not the new disagree. This was not a new disagreement. Leah saw cell phones as the expensive investment that they are, making them worthy of a protective case. Rosie saw a gorgeous limited edition rose gold finish on her phone, something beautiful and worthy of showing off, not something to cover up with a case. Leah watched her closely, wondering if she was going to turn it into an argument or not. "Okay," Rosie said, setting the case aside and picking up another present. Leah fought back the frustrating sigh, reminding herself that it was Christmas Day. "How about we take a few upstairs and open them with Dad?" Leah said. Rose turned to her, concerned expression on her face. "Is he up for that?" Rosie asked. Leah tried to force her most reassuring smile onto her face. Rosie treated her ill father like he was made of glass. It was understandable. She spent a fourth of her life being told that her dad was going to die soon. Leah could only imagine the toll that took on the child. "Of course he is, sweetie," Leah said. "Your dad loves Christmas." Rosie smiled and nodded. "I'll find one of his, too. she said, digging through the gifts, one with Mark's name on it. Once Rosie had gathered a few presents, they had headed upstairs. Leah walked over to Mark and gently shook, shook his face. Honey, Santa brought you a Christmas present. Mark's eyes slowly opened. They were glassy and unfocused. He blinked several times before he seemed to notice Leah standing over him. He regally reached up and slid the oxygen mask from his mouth. Christmas, he asked. Rosie stepped beside the hospital bed and placed Mark's present on his chest. He smiled and he saw his daughter. Hey, baby, he said, reaching out for her. Hi, Daddy. Rosie leaned down onto him as he embraced her. The moment later, she stepped back, holding a present of her own. Let's open our presents together, Rosie said. Mark smiled and nodded. Picking up his gift, he held it by his ear and shook it. Sounds like a tie, he said. Rosie laughed. As always, it's always a tie, Dad. The question is, what color did Santa bring you this year? Rosie asked. Leah settled into her recliner and watched the two most important people in her life bonding over Christmas gifts. She couldn't imagine anything better. Christmas Day, +1. A persistent beeping noise pulled Leah from her sleep. She opened her eyes, her tired brain trying to figure out what was going on. Another series of beeps drew her attention, and suddenly she was wide awake. It was coming from one of Mark's medical machines. Leah threw her blankets aside, going out of her recliner quickly. She moved around Mark's hospital bed to examine the machines. After 3 years, she was an expert at this. She had a checklist for possibility issues, and as soon as she figured out the problem, one of the tubes had come disconnected, probably when Mark shifted in the bed. She reconnected it, and the beeping went back to its usual calm rhythmic pattern. Leah let out a tense breath. It was a bad way to wake up. Deep down, she figured the beeping would mean something much more grim. She studied her sleeping husband. To the latest doctor had told them that Mark wouldn't make it to Thanksgiving, but here they were a day after Christmas. It's a good book. It's a really good story so far. I really like it. hmm It's actually a really nice read. Um, and he was still with them, alive, but was he really living? Leah hated those thoughts, and she shook her head, refusing to think them now. Moving back in her recliner, she looked around for her phone, finding it was in the cushion. It was a little after 4 a.m. More sleep sounded nice, but she stayed up. She couldn't get in early workout session in the garage. Her eyes drifted from the recliner to Mark, and her mind was made up. They're here. Up here, she was powerless. But in the garage with her weights and punching bag, she was growing more powerful every day. She changed into her workout clothes and then quickly left the room. She fought off a yawn as she went downstairs into the kitchen. She started gathering ingredients to make a pre workout shake, then stopped when suddenly caught her eye over the Christmas tree. Leah slowly walked in the direction, feeling that moment like she was dreaming. There were Christmas presents everywhere. She walked into the Christmas tree. Her first thought was Rosie was playing some sort of prank on her by rewrapping all the gifts that they opened yesterday. Leah picked up one of the gifts and had her name on it. It didn't feel like an empty box, so she opened it. Inside was a pair of top of the line fight gloves. Leah couldn't Leah's current pair were worn down and sweat soaked. She'd been meaning to replace them, but just hadn't a chance. She spotted a gift from Mark and unwrapped it. It was another tie, but in a different color pattern than the one he had yesterday. What's going on? Leah turned into a slow circle and smiled slowly, spreading across her lips. She wasn't sure why, but it seemed that Santa had bought them another round of Christmas gifts. The blizzard outside was picking up intensely, and Leah chuckled. Maybe Santa knew they'd be stuck in the house all day and wanted to deliver extra amounts of cheers. The sorted, she sorted the presents and then decided to turn on the morning news. The large bar at the bottom of the screen said another Christmas, and scenes of snow swept the roads and Christmas trees with abundant gifts under them played. Leah pressed the unmute button. leaving authorities baffled as to why Santa would bring a second round of gifts to households worldwide. I want to welcome in our new Paulette, single mother from Aberdeen, South Dakota, who has a lot to say about the surprise repeat of Christmas, the newscaster said. A second video window appeared on the screen showing a smiling woman sitting in her kitchen. In the background, two boys were playing with toys. Paulette, thank you for joining us, the newscaster said. You sent our station a great message this morning about what an unexpected second Christmas was meant to you and your family. Would you mind sharing with our viewers? The woman smiled and nodded. I'd be happy to. Up until this morning, I could never convince my boys that Santa was real. They were convinced that it was just me buying their gifts, and I do buy some of them. The best ones have always come from Santa. But money was tight this year, and yesterday was a smaller Christmas for us. Even with extra gifts from Santa, then this morning happened. I've never seen my boys light up the way they did when they saw more presents under the tree. This time I told them that Santa was real, and he was the one that did it. They believe me. They've been playing and laughing morning, Paulette said. Paulette, on the off chance that Santa is watching this newscaster, is there anything that you'd like to say to him? The woman nodded, tears beginning to fill her eyes. Thank you, Santa. I don't know why you decided to bring a second Christmas, but I'm so thankful you did. The screen shifted, now showing only the newscaster. Similar scenes are playing out not just across the United States but worldwide. As households woke up in shock, Holiday replied, "We can go now to our correspondent," and Leah muted the television. She couldn't seem to stop smiling. Good job, Santa, she said quietly. After taking another look at the presents under the tree, Leah went back to the kitchen and finished her pre-workout shake. She went into the garage, started her stretches, excited to show Rosie all the new presents and spend another Christmas with her. Christmas Day number 2. Leah felt her eyes starting to close as an attempt as it was to give into sleep. She forced it away. She stood up from the couch and wandered around the living room, hoping the movement would help her keep awake. Checking her phone, she saw that it was a little past 3 a.m. now. She started to feel a little silly. She glanced at two mugs sitting on the coffee table, both filled with a freshly made protein shake. Santa had visited 2 nights in a row, so she came up with a crazy eye. She thought would come to a third night too. This time she'd hoped to wake to see him and say hello. But the later it got, the more foolish she seemed. Leo frowned, then shook her head. She silently chastised herself from being such a child as she walked over to the coffee table, picking up the two mugs. She carried them over to the sink, but before she dumped them out, she heard a loud sound on the roof, like a sleigh landing. Suddenly breathing heavier, Leah stared at the fireplace. Severe long second pauses, she started wondering if she'd been imagining sounds that she wished were there, but then they weren't. After 10 seconds of staring at the fireplace, her face fell. No one was coming down the chimney. Not, at least not tonight. Grow up, Leah, she muttered to herself. Her eyes went wide, the sounds way too real in her head. She set the two mugs down and she stopped around the kitchen island, looking forward at the front door, but then she didn't hear the thing. She realized, knock, knock, knock. She turned suddenly, zoning in on the source of the noise, the side door that led into the backyard. Her heart was beating so hard that she could hear it in her ears. She moved quickly over to the door. It was hard to see much through the small window and the door thanks to the blizzard outside, but a shape standing there was remarkable. Tears started to fill her eyes. She pulled the door open. She didn't even notice the freezing wind that would come in swirling into her house. Her eyes were glued to the figure standing there before her. She goes, "It's you," she said. "I saw that you were awake," Santa said. "I didn't want to come crashing down the chimney and scare you, so I figured it was more appropriate to knock." Leah could barely believe he was actually there. He just stood in the doorway. She just stood in the doorway staring at him, letting the cold wind and snow. After a long moment, he had motioned to the large bag of gifts over his shoulder. He goes, "Do you mind?" Shaking her head, Leah stepped aside, monitoring for him to come inside. "No, not of course not. Please come in," she said. Santa stepped into the house. She spent years thinking her memories of him were exaggerated, but being in his presence, she realized that wasn't the case. He was taller than most people realized, and that's at least 6'3". And while he did have noticeably belly, thick bands of muscle defined his arms and legs. His long white beard had speckles of snow and ice in it. He went to the Christmas tree and started piling gifts out of his sack, carefully placing them. "I know I took the world by surprise with my visit last night, but I sure missed the protein shake you normally have for me," Santa said. In this highlight of deliberate process for me, Leah smiled wide and hurried toward the kitchen. She grabbed one of the mugs and she brought it over to Santa, holding it out for him. Proudly, he placed the last gift and then looked up at her. A big smile spread across his face. His cheeks looked extra rosy. "You knew I was coming tonight," he asked. "I hoped." He stood up, took the mug from her, staring at her with a twinkle in his eye. "You've always been good at that," Santa said. He took a drink and then he nodded um, appreciatively. "So good," he said. Leah felt like a little girl as she watched him. She remembered what it was like those years ago when he first visited her. The room just felt brighter with him in it. It was a feeling that she didn't want to let go. "Can you stay a while?" she asked. Santa smiled at her and nodded. "It's one of the main reasons I'm doing this whole repeated Christmas thing, actually," he said. "I'm normally in such a rush. It's nearly impossible to meet or check on them. Between you and I, it was turning the whole thing into a bit of a chore for me, which I was never the plan." Leah mentioned toward the couch. "Please sit," she said. Santa brushed off the snow, then sat down. Leah sat down too, turning sideways on the cushion so that she could stare right at Santa. She was aware that she had a grin on her face, but she didn't care. Santa was there. "I spent a few years trying to figure out how to slow things down, maybe rekindle a bit of magic of Christmas for myself, but nothing is working," Santa said. Then a few weeks ago, the idea came to me. Maybe I don't need to slow Christmas down. I just need to extend it. He paused and looked over at her. "Does that seem crazy?" he asked. Leah shook her head. "Not at all," she said. "I saw a woman on the news yesterday. She talked about how you returned on the 26th meant so much to her kids. People are starting to believe again, Santa." He smiled and nodded slowly. He then reached into his pocket and pulled a small notebook and a pen. "Do you remember the woman's name?" he asked. "It was Paulette something from Aberdeen, South Dakota." Santa smiled as he wrote, "I know Pauline. She was curious as a little girl. I got her into trouble from time to time, but it was sure kept life interesting from her and her parents," he said, finishing writing, and then he put the notebook away. "I'd be sure to stop in for a visit tonight and meet those boys of hers. I'm sure that will mean a lot to them," Leah said. "If it's anything like when you visited me back when I was 10, it just might change their lives." Santa chuckled. "You remember that?" he asked. Leah's mouth dropped open. "Do you remember that, Santa? It was the most defining moment in my life. Up until then, I hadn't exactly had a good run in life. Things were." Her voice trailed off as memories of that time in her life came rushing back. Santa reached over and squeezed her hand. "I know," he said softly. "Life is not fair sometimes." She nodded slowly. Sadness wanted to overtake her, but there was no way she was going to allow that. Not while Santa was right in front of her. "But then you came along. You were my inspiration to change. You gave me strength to fight." Santa patted her on her hand, and then he took another drink of his shake. "And you fought beautifully, little Leah. He pointed up at the mantel above the fireplace. It was adorned with family photos. Look at what you were able to do, Santa said, and all I know about your shelf out in the garage too. There are some impressive photos of you out there. I know that I You know that I fight, Leah asked. Everyone knows about the lady killer, Santa said with a laugh. Normally I don't approve of violence, but I have to admit, when elves showed me the highlights from of your fights, I was impressed. Leah covered her eyes for a moment and laughed. I can't believe that Santa and his elves have seen highlights of some of my fights, he said. Even the elves love that stuff. MMA, professional wrestling, they always watch things like that, Santa said. The elves, Leah laughed, thinking just how so real it was to have this conversation with Santa. She watched as she took a long drink from his shake. He wiped the excess from his mouth and then sighed. I'm afraid I need to get going, he said. So soon, Leah asked, trying to find trying and failing to hide her disappointment. Santa stood up and then nodded. I'm afraid so. It's a big world out there, and I want to make sure that I have enough time to make a few more special stops. He turned towards her, held out his arms. Leah stepped in and melted into his embrace. He smelled like cookies in winter, and she wasn't sure if she'd ever quite feel this warm as she felt at this moment. A few tears slipped from her eyes and she squeezed him. Santa held her for a long moment and then released her and stepped back. It was good to visit with you again, Leah, Santa said. You too, Santa. Thank you for taking the time, Leah said. I wish I wouldn't have kept Rosie up so she could have met her. Santa walked towards the door. He put his hands on the handle and then paused. There's always next time, he said, a mischievous grin on his face. Leah's eyes narrowed as she tried to discern what he meant. Do you mean next time, or as in next year, or like next time? She asked. Santa winked and then opened the door and stepped out into the raging blizzard. Leah laughed as she watched him go. Christmas Day plus three, number three. Leah paced across the living room, then back again. She frowned as she looked at the couch. Rosie was asleep there despite Leah's efforts to keep her awake. She'd even allowed Rosie to drink a cup of coffee, something she never did. It felt important to introduce her to Santa. Leah felt like she was losing her. Every day her little girl disappointed a little bit more. She'd hoped that meeting Santa might bring back some of the childlike wonder that her daughter seemed to be in short supply of these days. Looking to distract herself, Leah turned on the TV. She left the volume as she flipped over the news network. Hopefully, it might rouse Rousey from her sleep. And I agreed to you, Mel. What Santa has been doing is great in a lot of ways, the newscaster said. But this winter storm that's been raging worldwide is becoming a real problem. Now, hang on, Stacy. There's no evidence to suggest that Santa is somehow causing this snowstorm, Mel said, but you have to admit the timing is uncanny. Santa decides to make Christmas a daily occurrence, and at the same time, the world gets turned into a winter wonderland. Those two events certainly seemed connected to me, Stacy argued. I'm sorry, Stacy. I must miss the announcement that you received a meteorology degree, Mel said. Hang on, that's not fair. No, it's not fair. You're trying to pin this weather pattern on Santa with nothing but circumstantial evidence. I did some digging and you want to know what I found? Three separate occurrences when the entire world experiences a multi day winter storm. We all know Santa's decision to turn Christmas into a 3 day event has no correlation to the weather, Nell argued. Yes, but knock, knock, knock. Leah turned the TV off and then she rushed to the side door. She smiled as she pulled it open, stepping inside and waving Santa in. Come in, Leah said. The snow was heavy outside, adding to the already substantial blanket of snow on the ground. Santa shook off much of it as he could, then came inside. Leah closed the door behind him. Santa sat his sack of gifts on down, then stepped closer to the couch. He smiled and he looked down at Rosie. Didn't make it, huh? Most kids her age never want to go to sleep and yet somehow I get the one kid who loves going to bed early, Leah said. She made it until about 2, but after that she was out like a light. Santa nodded slowly. I've been delayed a bit tonight, he said, his brow frowning. It seems that not everyone is pleased with the idea of this expanded Christmas. Leah shook her head as she brought Santa his protein shake. Who would be crazy enough to complain about extra Christmases? Leah asked. Santa smiled as he took her mug. Exactly, you get it. And then again, you've always did have a healthy respect for the importance of Christmas, Santa said. I'm out here running two sleighs most nights. Elves are driving at one and making deliveries. I drive the main sleigh to make visits like these, well, also delivering gifts. It's a lot of work. But seeing smiles on faces like yours makes it worth my while. He took a long drink from his mug, then he sat it down at the coffee table. How about you try to arouse that kid of yours while I get these presents under the tree? Santa said. She nodded. She knelt by the couch and gently shook her daughter. Rosie's eyes open. Honey, Santa's here. Her daughter didn't respond at all. Leah frowned. She knew that Rosie was a deep sleeper, but this was once in a lifetime. She shook her harder, spoke louder. Rosie, Santa's here to say hi. Rosie let out a loud groan. Mm-hmm. She asked her as her eyes remained closed. Santa finished placing the gifts under the tree, came over to the couch. He knelt down beside Leah, smiling as he looked at Rosie. She's beautiful, he said. And stubborn, Leah said. Santa cut his eyes at Leah and pulled at the edge of his mouth. Wherever might get wherever might she get that from? He asked. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Leah smiling back. Oh, I got an idea, Santa said. He reached into his sack of gifts, pulled out a large stuffed animal. It was a unicorn. Unicorn. He turned back to Rosie. Rosie, it's Santa. You can hear me. She groaned again. One of her eyes fluttered open. Santa? She asked quietly. He smiled as he nodded. I just wanted to say hello and let you know that you've been a very special mom. That you have a very special mom. I see a lot of her in you, Santa said. Rosie tried to open her eyes further. She couldn't pull She couldn't seem to pull it off. Santa chuckled and pushed the stuffed unicorn into her arms. Rosie squeezed tightly, her eyes closed fully again. Thank you, Santa, she whispered and slipped back into. She likes to. Maria's a person that I'm talking to, and uh, she's a person that I met from Facebook dating. She lives all the way out in Blue Earth, and yeah, she sent me a message. Let's see. She said, "Thank you, Santa," as she whispered as she slipped back into sleep. Santa swept her hair out of her face and smiled down at her. You're welcome, little one. He stood up and stepped to the side door. Judy calls, Leah asked. Santa gave her Santa gave her that sad smile and nodded. A lot of miles yet to cover. Thank you for doing this, Santa. With Mark's illness, things have been tough for her, Leah said. Yeah, she's a she's a tough kid with tough parents. Something tells me she's gonna be okay, Santa said. Leah wiped a tear from her eye and then nodded. She stepped closer and hugged Santa. He patted on her back. Get some rest, Leah, Santa said. She released a hug and nodded, watching Santa step into the snow. She closed and locked the side door and then glanced back at her sleeping daughter and smiled. Christmas Day number 4. Leah opened the closet, then frowned. She forgot about all the excess Christmas gifts that she had stored in there. She felt like a pang of guilt as she moved them out of the way. It wasn't that she didn't appreciate Santa bringing them, it's just that they were the only so much space in the house. With all the gifts out of the way, she started taking stock in medical supplies on the shelf in the closet. She frowned again. They were low on almost everything. The amount of items needed to take care of Mark was almost overwhelming. That wasn't even enough to consider how many medications. She was overdue with the trip to the pharmacy, was trying to waited out, going through the blizzard conditions. She gathered a few items that needed to go upstairs, then sat them on the counter. She started stacking Christmas gifts back into the closet. Knock, knock, knock. Leah pulled out her cell phone to check the time. It was just a little past midnight. Way too early for Santa visit. She walked across the living room. She looked out the side door, and there stood Santa. Leah pulled the door open quickly. Santa, you're early, she said. He stomped a few times, knocking the snow off his boots, and came inside. I didn't make a protein. I didn't make a protein shake, Leah said. I didn't know if you were coming back. Santa moved towards the Christmas tree. He started pulling the gifts from his bag. Leah frowned and watched him. Something seems off. I can whip something real quick if you'd like. It only takes a few minutes. He glanced back at her. He usually smiled. The jolly disposition was nowhere to be seen. Don't trouble yourself, Leah. I only have a minute. She stepped closer. Something wrong? He looked at her, was going to respond, then he shook his head, returning to the task of putting the. Everything's fine, he said. Leah felt terrible as she watched him. His shoulders were slumped, like a joy had been taken out of him. It was unnatural to see him like this. You can talk to me, Santa. I hope you know that, Leah said. He placed his last present and turned his face. After a long moment, a sad smile appeared on his lips. He says, I'm not afraid I'm not very jolly tonight, he said. It's okay. No one is jolly all the time, Leah said. I'm Santa Claus. Jolliness is expected, Leah shrugged. Not among friends. Here you can feel however you feel. He started at her for a long time, then nodded. He removed his hat and wiped his brow, letting out a long sigh. It's these people, Leah, this world. It's not a love for old Santa Claus anymore, I fear. His voice had an edge to it now, a slight strain of grief. Leah paused. He flaunted his sack of gifts over his shoulder forcefully. Even Santa wasn't impervious to the stress life. She realized that you're talking about the biohazards on the news. Yeah, they were just stirring up trouble, is what they do. It's them. The others, they pushed and they pushed. It's his voice trailed off for a long moment. They're putting me in a position I'd rather not be in, that's all. Leah nodded, unsure of what else to do. Santa's jaw tightened. He took several heavy breaths. I've been around for a long time and lots changed, but not human nature, he said. I've started to suspect that it can be changed. Leah was growing uneasy. Santa, she wanted to help. She wanted to help, but wasn't sure what to do, stressing out. Agitated Santa. Is there anything I can do? I need to go, Santa interrupted. He moved to the side door. Okay, good night, Santa, Leah said. Santa left without responding. Christmas Day, number 5. Leah screamed. The thing crawling out of her fireplace was certainly not Santa Claus. It was just 2 feet tall. She had assumed it was one of Santa's elves, but nothing could have prepared her for the ghoulish appearance. It it bared its teeth at her threateningly as it dragged the bag of gifts behind it out of the fireplace. It looked sickly and diseased, with skin so pale that Leah could see the veins running beneath it. It started dragging the gifts over to the tree and took frequent breaks to scratch itself. Within a few moments, Leah also started to smell the creature. She didn't want to be rude, but she also couldn't help but gag. She used a shirt to cover her nose, trying to block the stank out of the small creature. After it was done, placing the gifts under the tree, it looked at her. What? It screamed. What? Assumed? Leah shook her head, not understanding. The elf looked angered at her. What was 'em? It screeched louder, followed by a phenomenon of eating and drinking. You asked for milk and cookies, Leah asked. The elf nodded. What's one of them? Repeated. Leah pointed at the mug on the coffee table. She prepared protein shakes differently tonight, hoping to impress Santa with a change of ingredients instead. She seemed to have going to settle for this unpleasing little, unpleasant little creature. It's all I made. Santa loves it. It gave her a disappointment glare, and then picked up the mug and sniffed it. The elf whined and immediately recoiled recoiled from the mug. Whoosh, he said with a nasty expression on his face. The elf turned the mug upside down, dumping the protein shake on the floor. Leah let out a frustrated sigh, but held her tongue, not wanting to upset one of Santa's elves. The elf waited till the contents of the mug were all gone, and then hitting the overturned mug to make sure the last remains of the shake were on the floor. Then he raised the mug to its mouth as he bit it off. No, oh no, that's not you. Leah tried and stopped the elf, took a large bite of the ceramic mug, looked unhappy as he chewed, spit it out, and Leah said, "You'll hurt yourself." The elf didn't listen. Instead, swallowing the mouthful of the ceramic shards, it immediately cried out and grasped its throat. The creature fell to the ground and began thrashing about. Leah stepped forward, wanting to help, but it screeched at her angrily, and she backed away. It stared, coughing and gagging, getting to its knees before spitting a mouthful of blood all over the coffee table and the carpet. The elf gathered up the empty gift sack, stumbled back into the fireplace, hacked up one more blood, then climbed into the fireplace with a whoosh and flew upward, disappearing as quickly as it appeared. What on earth? Leah asked as she looked at the blood all over her living room. It took her almost an hour to clean up and sanitize. She wasn't sure if Santa was going to continue to extend Christmas again tomorrow, but he hoped that he'd show up himself instead of another elf. The idea of more gifts delivered by elves wasn't a pleasant one. The idea of more gifts delivered by anyone else wasn't a pleasant one either. She frowned as she looked at the Christmas tree. Rosie was getting a little less enthusiastic about getting gifts every day, and Leah had to admit she was too. She shook her head and then turned off the downstairs lights and headed to bed. Christmas Day number 6. This time Leah was prepared. As a sickly elf came crashing out of her fireplace, she was positioned across the room wearing a mask to block the stench. The creature was different from the one last night, but no one less unpleasant. The screeching over and over without a care. That was 3 a.m., dragging its sack of gifts over to the tree and started placing them under the tree. Then it paused to blow its nose, sending mucus flying all over it. Leah reached out, taking notes of where the mucus had landed so she could sanitize the area. Once the gifts were placed, the elf turned around and looked at her. "What's one he screeched. Leah pointed at the coffee table. She prepared a protein shake in case Shannon showed up, but she also been ready for another visit. She had a plate of cookies and a small cup of milk sitting on the table. The elf rushed over, frantically reaching for the cookies. He knocked the cup of milk over, spilling it, but didn't seem to notice. Shoved the cookies into his mouth one after another. "Slow down, you'll choke," Leah said. Unable to keep her motherly insights to herself, the elf didn't slow down and instantly had all 6 cookies in his mouth, cheeks bulging out like a squirrel with a mound of nuts. They all started to chew and then immediately started to choke, spit out half the cookies, and crawled onto the coffee table, sucked sucked up some of this spilled milk directly from the surface, then hopping off the table, rushed back into the fire, disappearing moments later. Leah started to stare at the mess for a long time. Finally, she said she got to work cleaning. Christmas Day number 7. Leah tried to focus as she read the page for the third time. Even though she was getting used to being up this late at night, she felt tired. She thought curling up in her recliner and reading a book might relax, but then she ground frustrated with her inability to focus. She jumped slightly as she felt someone touching her shoulder. Then she realized immediately when she realized it was Mark. "Hi, honey," Lee said. "Do you need something?" He slowly shook his head. "Shouldn't you be downstairs waiting for Santa?" Mark said, having to pause to catch his breath for mid-silence. She glanced at her phone. It was almost 3 a.m., right around when Santa or one of his elves had generously showing up. Truthfully, she was feeling a little anxious over the possibility of another elf showing up, and even if it was Santa, again, she wasn't sure she had a lot of cheer to share with him. Worries were filling in her mind. The ongoing storm was keeping her from going back to work, and looked like Rosie's school was going to be postponed, reopening by a week. There was also an issue of Mark's prescriptions. They were due to be refilled one any day now. She would even she would she even be able to get to the pharmacy? Leah. A smile, a forceful smile focused on him. She told him about Santa's visits, but not about the elves. She also hadn't shared her mounting concerns with him. Had enough to worry about. You're right, Leah said. I'm going to keep an eye out for Santa. She leaned over and kissed Mark on the forehead, then got up and left the room. She started down the stairs to the living room, where she heard knocking on the soft door. Relief was over. She realized she wouldn't have to deal with another elf. Then knocking repeatedly. In just a second, she called out. She hurried across the living room, pulled the door open. Santa stepped inside quickly. He was covered in snow. Leah closed the door as fast as she could, not before the biting cold winds came crashing inside, lowering the temperature in the house dramatically. She turned to face Santa. He didn't look like he was in the best of moods. Despite some of her despite some of her growing concerns over the ongoing Christmas, she hated seeing him like this. She forced a smile as she greeted him. Hey Santa, she said, I got a protein shake ready for you. Not tonight, Lee. I only have a minute. I just wanted to make sure you and your family these gifts, he said. Leah frowned and watched him as he began. You know you're welcome to come to visit. You don't have to bring gifts every time. Santa snapped his head around with a fierce expression on his face. Have you been watching the news? Leah shook her head surprisingly. No, I just because that's exactly the kind of thing people have been saying. Too many presents spoiling the children. It's nonsense. He said he was more worked up than she'd ever seen him. Leah nodded slowly, forcing herself to smile again. I wasn't complaining, Santa. I just wanted you to know what I've done already is enough. That's all, Leah said. He seemed to relax slightly, but he could still see sense of his interrogation as he went back to putting the gifts on the tree. I would never be dreaming so many people would take something as wonderful as Christmas and twist it into a bad thing, Santa said. You wouldn't believe some of the things I'm having to deal with, Leah. She nodded and un- nodded, unsure of how to deal with him when he was like this. She wanted to believe that she could be honest with Santa and share what she really was thinking and feeling, but he was on such an edge that she worried about how he would react. I can only imagine, she said. People seem to default being outraged these days. I think the only thing I've heard that makes sense are the concerns about the weather. Santa finished placing his gifts. He stood up and turned his face to her. You told me once that you loved experiencing a white Christmas, he said. She nodded. I do, Santa. I did. But it's been 8 days now, and we're starting to have concerns about the power grid and the road conditions have never been this bad before. I read on social media that a lot of the grocery stores are not able to get restocked due to these conditions. Santa frowned. Social media is full of lies, Leah, and besides, the children love the snowy weather, Santa said. Something in his defense tone a spark, though, on her mind. She considered not vouching for it, and she had to know. Santa, are you? The weather storm's happening because of you, she asked. It doesn't truly feel like Christmas unless it isn't snowing, Santa snapped. I'm sorry to be short with you, but that's just the truth. Now, please, Leah, stop with the questions. Children are thriving thanks to this extended Christmas. Kids who barely get any gifts have 8 Christmases in a row now. They're loving it. Leah glanced over at the closet, thankful that Santa couldn't see inside. It was filled with the last few gifts. Rosie said she'd get around to opening them someday, but they were just piling up at this point. She just got overexcited with the millions. She certainly was loving the extension of Christmas anymore. Santa stepped closer and put his hand on Leah's shoulder. He smiled as he studied his face, and she could help notice that he exhausted he looked. It's been a trying few weeks, a few days, but I think I'm making a breakthrough with this whole thing. Make us shakes tomorrow night, and I'll stay a little longer. I want to hear about some of the great people I've been able to meet these past few nights, Santa. Leah looked at him and smiled, and sounded nice, she said. He nodded as she watched as he left, shivering as the open door let out another blast of frigid winds. Once she was sure he was gone, she started transferring new presents into the closet. Then she was done. She stood staring into the closet. It was almost completely full now. Whatever presents Santa might bring the next day, we're gonna have to store it elsewhere. Knock, knock, knock. Leah jumped. Santa had never returned before. She slammed the closet door, hoping he didn't see her put the gifts in there, and then started towards the door. Just a second, Santa was. Her voice trailed off. Got close to the thing. See a man standing. It wasn't a jolly man in red. It was a man standing there wearing white camouflage. It was difficult to make out more details of the heavy snow falling. She stepped closer and squinted, trying to get a better look. The man pressed some sort of credentials against the door. Leah, let me in, please, the man said. She tenderly stepped closer. The man seemed vaguely familiar to know her. It's John. John Worley from college. Leah was equal parts surprised and confused. She cracked the door open and peered out on him. He had a wildly bushy beard and two scars running parallel down his cheek. The kindness in his blue eyes she had been taken with those years seemed to be gone, replaced by a steady gaze. But this was different. John Worley, I, is it Wortley? She slowly pulled the front door further open. What in the world are you doing here, John? He offered a quick smile, then pointed at her, and then he pointed past her. Can we have this talk inside? I can feel my fingers out here. Leah could feel her chest tighten, but she stepped aside, let him enter. No matter how uncomfortable the sudden appearance made her feel, she knew he wouldn't do anything to hurt her. She closed the door behind him. My husband's upstairs, Leah said, unsure of why those particular words seemed important enough to say. John gave her a strange look. I know, Leah. She's always found John's way of acting as if he knew everything was to be one of those most annoying traits. He walked over to the coffee table, looked down protein shake that she made for Santa. What is this? John asked. Without waiting for a response or permission, he picked up the mug and started to drink it. Then he tipped it back, drinking the entire protein shake. He lowered the mug, smacked his lips, sour expression on his face. It's chalky, he said. It's been a while since Leah wanted to punch somebody, but she thought about how nice it would feel to run her fist into John's face. She thought about that a lot during the time she knew him. He looked over at her, slowly picking up on what was the feeling. You don't look very happy to see me, he said, a slight smile on his face. At last I heard you were off to play soldier in the desert and never returned, he said, the mug on the mantel, picking up one of the family photos. That's pretty accurate, actually, he said, settling down as the picture and picking up the next one. Family portrait, cute kid. Whatever this is, Leah decided that she didn't like it. Why are you here, John? He set the picture frame down. He turned to face her, and then the slight smile was gone from his face. I've been sent here to talk to you about Santa Claus. For the reason she couldn't explain, the settlement made her feel defensive. She could feel her cheeks flush and the moment try to calm her emotions before responding. Sent by who? Leah asked. The United States government, Leah, John replied. She shook her head and blinked, trying to make sense of what he was saying. The military. Or like the government? Leah asked. The government, he said. I thought you were in the army, Leah said. Oh, was that a lie? If I remember correctly, you were getting pretty good at telling lies. John sighed and rubbed his eyes. Can we keep this civil? I've spent 17 of my last 24 hours on a plane, and the other 7 were going over intelligence reports and sitting with the meetings with. You're avoiding the question, Leah said, interrupting him. I want to know. I'm not at liberty to discuss this designation, and even if I was, I wouldn't recognize it. Let's just say that I'm an operator. At this point in time, I'm acting as an official capacity for the United States government, okay? Leah shook her head. She didn't like any of this. Why are you in my house, John? Leah, sit down, okay? I know this is strange, but you'll have to just sit and listen. I'll get through this and you get out of your hair. She crossed her arms. I'm standing fine, she said. The moment she thought she saw a slight smile play at the edge of his lips. Still ready to fight the whole world, huh? He asked. Excuse me? I didn't think you'd get to. It's fine, John said, interrupting her. Stand if you want to. Leah, we need to talk to you about Santa Claus and this whole never-ending Christmas of what Christmas he's got going on. Why me? Leah asked. John cocked his head slightly. Why you? Seriously? Leah clenched her jaw and fought
to keep her emotions from leaking into her expression. I don't know anything more about this extended Christmas than anyone else, she said. John's eyebrows shot up. A sly smile appeared on his face, and Leah could be sure that he almost looked impressed by her response. I know he means a lot to you, John said. He means a lot to a lot of the people, Leah shot back. On December 27th, Santa entered your home from the same door that I just did. You visited with him for several minutes. He delivered presents and he left. On December 28th, Santa once again entered your home through the side door, this time not only visiting you, but your daughter Rosie was in the room as well. He stayed for several minutes, delivered presents, and left. Leah's face was flushed with red heat as she listened to John continue to describe the events. December 28th, Santa visits several hours ahead of his usual scheduled time. He stays for a little bit, over a minute. Then, how do you know all this? Leah asked, interpreting. I know this is the same way. I know this is the same way I already knew your husband was upstairs, hooked up to machines, fighting for his life. The same way I know that your daughter Rosie told her school counselor she was afraid to have a relationship with her father because she knows it'll make it hurt when he dies. John said, stepping closer to Leah as the intensity in his voice grew. I know all this, just like you know. I know that Santa sent his elves here on the 29th and the 30th, not because he was busy elsewhere, because he was posted agents at multiple points on your street in a van in front of your house to watch for him and spotted those agents and took off. And information exists, the footage exists, and there are satellite feeds that exist. The government can get its hands on it and you can feel whatever the way you want about it. Fact doesn't change right now. John paused and took a breath when he spoke again with his voice was softer. You're not in trouble, Leah, but Santa has personally visited you more than anyone else. We think he sees you as a confidant. Leah was done standing idly by and listening. She stepped closer, throwing her arms as a response. So what? Santa hasn't done anything wrong. John shook his head. In 1 week, he's brought a national power grid to the brink of collapse. In 1 week, he's crippled not just Americans' infrastructure, but worldwide infrastructure. For the first time since 9/11, no planes were in the sky above America today because conditions were so bad at every airport. Cattle and poultry are freezing to death, meaning that the next wave of meat would end up on grocery shelves and kitchen tables is going to exist. He paused, glaring at her. Don't tell me that Santa hasn't done anything wrong. You're talking about the weather, John. Santa can't control the weather, John snapped. He knows we've known this for years. Usually he doesn't do it. When he does it, it's a way just for a day to make the snow on Christmas so that nobody cares. Leah glared at him. She wanted to argue with him to defend Santa more, but after that, what Santa had told her, night she knew that John was right. Even though his intentions were pure, Santa was hurting a lot of people by keeping this blizzard raging for so long. So you know about the weather thing? John asked. Her eyes went wide, then rushed and anger went through her. Is that what they sent you? You always were good at reading people, Leah said bitterly. John stepped out of around the couch and stood right in front of her. I'm good at reading people, but that's not why they sent me. They did it because they know we have a past. They wanted me to use that emotionally to manipulate you. But I'm not going to do that, Leah, because that's not how I operate. Because you're not someone who can be manipulated, he said. His expression softened. They may not know about you, but I do, he said. Leah stared at him for a long moment. Her stomach was feeling increasingly queasy as her conversation carried on. She was angered at John for being here, but also a little at herself for not confronting Sandra about some of the things already. She broke eye contact and then spoke. What does the government think I have to offer? Santa won't communicate, John said. The president loves Santa, and hopefully that he can engage him in conversation, and he can make him right to see how harmful his actions. Leah looked back at John, waiting for the ask, or waiting for the ask. Tomorrow night when Santa is here, someone is going to call your phone. I'll come up with a private number, answer it, and then pass the phone to Santa, John said. She waited for a moment, but John stayed silent. That that's it, Lee asked. He nodded. That's it. The president just needs to talk to him. Think about actually doing made her stomach churn even more. Santa was growing more agitated by the day, and he may view her as betrayal, but all the world would would be was conversation and could help a lot of people. Finally, okay, I'll do it. Thank you, Leah. I'll let the president know. He was very pleased. As a fan of your fights, by the way, he asked me to tell you. Apparently, he's. Can you please leave, John? Leah asked, interrupting. This has been an upsetting night, and I want you to get out of my house. Part of her felt bad for her short, but she had a raging headache developing and wanted to get this day done. John nodded and moved towards the door. He paused. Thank you, he said. He left as soon as the door clicked shut. Leah signed relief. Christmas Day, number 8. Thump to whack. Thump, thump, thump. Leah's muscles were burning and she was covered in sweat. This was her second time in the garage today. She knew she was overdoing it, but worked it out. Hitting the bags were her only way of burning off nervous energy, and she had a lot to burn off. She glanced over at her phone. Her arms dropped. It was 2:30. Time to get ready for Santa's visit. She wiped herself down with a towel, then headed out of the garage. She made 2 protein shakes, trying to annoy John's voice in her head. That's chocolate. Then took them over to the dining table. What was left to do was wait. About 30 minutes later, knock, knock, knock. Her heart rate increased, but she looked deep. She took deep breaths and stood up. She reminded herself as she walked to the side door that Santa had done for everything he meant to her. He smiled as he opened up the door and said to him standing there covered in snow, "Get in here. It's freezing out," Leah said. Santa did as she said, stepping into the house. She can. Good evening, Santa said. He moved towards the Christmas tree, but Leah grabbed his arm, stopping him. He turned his head back and looked at her, and a confused expression on his face. She thought about all this day, and she wasn't going to abandon her plan. Santa, I'd like you to skip the gifts, Leah said. You'd like me to. Santa narrowed his eyes, seeming confused. I don't understand. You have a huge heart, Santa, and I'm so thankful for everything that you've done over the past 8 days. But we have too much stuff now. I want I don't want Rosie to get spoiled, and honestly, we're running out of room here. She waited, unsure of how he was going to react. He looked shocked, and she decided to take advantage. She gently pulled on his arm. Let's sit at the table. I've got shakes and a few snacks for her. Santa hesitated for a long moment, then he finally relented. He put the sacks of gifts on the floor, and he allowed her to lead him over to the dining room table. It's not Christmas gifts without Leah. It's not Christmas without gifts, Leah, Santa said. It's January 2nd, Santa. I think the rules of what I think the rules for what it makes it's Christmas can be different this far from December 25th. She motioned towards one of the chairs. Sit, please, she said. He didn't seem comfortable, but he did as asked. Leah sat across from him, motioned to the plate of treats between them. Flaxseed bagels, sugar-free protein brownies, and some raw almonds, Leah said. Leah tried to keep a smile on her face, but struggled to maintain as she tried to figure out how to move on to the next subject. Santa's eyes eyed the plate for a moment, then looked over at her. You're overdoing it here, Leah. Do you have something else to say to me beyond rejecting my gifts? Santa asked. Leah frowned. If you need to leave the gifts, you can, but I decided today that I was going to be honest with you about everything, Leah said, letting the words hang in the air for a moment. I understand you not wanting to listen to the talking heads on the news or the people on social media, but I want you to believe that after all these years, you know me well enough to trust that anything I say to you comes from a place of love and admiration. He regretted her for a long moment. She struggled to despite his expression. He didn't seem happy, but he also didn't seem angry, which for her was a victory. Finally, he took a sip of his protein shake, leaned back in his chair.
Out with it then, Santa said. I have serious concerns about this ongoing Christmas, and especially about the accompanying snowstorm. If this weather keeps up, power failures are guaranteed to start happening. What did I tell you about social media? Santa asked. It's filled with exaggeration and outright lies. The fear is monitoring is what it is. Santa is not. It's not fear monitoring. These are legitimate concerns, and it's not just on social media. Municipally and utility companies are talking about this now. They're warning us about what might happen. Santa leaned forward. Use your head, Leah. Municipal and utility companies are loving this. Do you know what happens to the price of natural gas during a winter storm? It rises by hundreds of percent. The utility companies are making a fortune on the back of my beautiful extended Christmas. They got you scared, convinced you crank up the thermostat and cling to the warmth for the next month so you're going to have an outrageous utility bill. Isn't that a good reason to call this thing off? Lee asked. Call it off? I'm making history here, Santa said. It's now, it's hard to see from down here, but from up there on my sleigh, high above it all, I can sense things changing. Santa reached across the table, grabbed Leah's hands. You're an athlete, a warrior. You, of all people, know that gets tough right before you make a breakthrough, Santa said. Don't lose faith right before you achieve victory. Leah gently pulled her hands away. She felt like she was losing him. She tries to think of a different tactic to make for him. You're right. I'm down here. When you talk about achieving victory, I don't know what that means anymore. Within 2 days, Mark's prescriptions will be out. Leah said, I can't make it to the pharmacy to get them filled. Even if I could, I can't get confirmation that they have medicines that he needs in stock anymore, as their two deliveries didn't come in. She was trying to keep her voice even, but couldn't help the tears that were starting to fill her eyes. My husband might die, Santa. What kind of victory is that? Santa pulled his hands back. He looked down at the table for a long time before speaking. I wish you would have told me this sooner. Write down the names of the medicines and I'll bring them the next time I come. Leah wished she couldn't be happier with his response, but she couldn't. What about the other people who need medicines and can't get it? She asked quietly. You can't fill all the world's worth of prescriptions, Santa. This is what I'm talking about. There are unindicted consequences to what you're doing. He shook his head. Christmas is the most magical time of the year. For every negative you point out, I could sit here and tell you about 20 positive things that have happened over the past 8 days. Like I feel like you're focusing on all the wrong things. Ring, ring. Leah jumped as her cell phone started to ring. She got so caught up in the intense conversation with Santa, she forgot the one thing that she was asked to do. Who calls at this time of the night? Santa asked. Leah picked up her phone. Just John, he had told her. All the displays were known as private. Oh, I don't know, Leah said. She answered the call and then pressed the phone against her ear. Hello? Give him the phone, Leah. The voice on the other end said, her heart pounding to her chest. She lowered the phone and extended it to, they want to talk to you. She said, her voice shakily. Santa's expression turned hard. He turned at the phone for a long moment, not reaching to take it. Put it on speaker, he said. Leah did as he asked, then set the phone on the table. After a moment of silence, someone on the other end said, Santa Claus, are you there, sir? A smooth voice on the voice of a politician asked. I am. Who am I speaking with? Santa asked. And in this voice, this is what he said. This is the President of the United States of America. You've been proven to be a hard man to get a hold of, Santa. Leah watched, entering demeanor changed. He looked at the phone with complete contempt. That's by design, Mr. President. I don't like to be involved in politics and the business of Christmas. Well, that's all good, but I'm afraid we've gone a bit beyond that now. I've got the Secretary of Energy who tells me our country is on the verge of total grid collapse. I've got nuclear submarines stuck in dry dock
Instead of out there in the Persian Gulf, keeping the Middle East from blowing itself to smithereens, the president said. I should keep listening off problems, or we could urge that we need to discuss. Shanna shook his head. These are issues, American issues I'm dealing with, and the issues across the entire world, Santa said. America issues are the world's issues, Santa. Where this great nation leads, the world follows. So if you can dare about, or if you can, if you care about helping the world, I need you to start thinking about helping America first. And you can do that by putting an end to all this extended Christmas and calling off the thing that have been going alongside it. Do you really just tell me to put an end to Christmas, Santa asked eagerly. Don't be dramatic, Santa. We'll be very happy to see you again later this year on December 25th. You can even bring another day of snow if you'd like. But for now, I need you to shut this thing down. The children need. The children need to get back to school, Mr. Claus, the president interrupted. And they need their mommies and daddies to be able to get them back to work so they can afford to buy groceries, pay the mortgage. So come on, be reasonable. Do what I'm telling you to do. Santa was breathing heavily. Leah felt like he was on the edge of losing control, but to her surprise, he sat back in his chair and took a deep breath. Hello, are you still there? The president asked. Do you remember what I brought you for Christmas when you were 9 years old? Santa asked, his voice entirely calm. I don't see how this is relevant. Indulge me, Mr. President. I'd like to make a point here, the president signed. If memory serves you, you brought me an electric train set. That's exactly right, a big present for a growing boy who seemed already for something more than knickknacks, Santa said. Do you ever wonder why after the year I never brought you another gift? After a long silence, the president asked, this is foolish. Can we speak about? You're telling me that you didn't keep that keep you up at night, wondering why Santa ignored your letters after years, wondering why your baby brother was receiving gifts into his late teens while you got nothing. Santa asked, his voice unmedically qualified. I figured it was too mature for Christmas presents, the president said. I thought maybe it was your endorsement of becoming a man. Ha! Wrong, Santa roared on the phone. If you see, I knew the plans that your father had for you. He had old world wealth and aspiration of power to go on along with it. I kept a close eye on you because I knew what he was going to spend his life pushing you towards. I knew it might matter to the whole world what kind of man you grow into. And so I checked in and watched. And when I saw what you did to your little brother over the electric train set, my brother was a little boy who was idolized by his big brother, Santa interrupted. He would have given everything to have an electric train set of his own, but he wasn't old enough for one. And you taunted him over it, promised to let him play with yours, only to snatch it away from him every time. For weeks you tortured him until finally, when he thought you were home, he couldn't take it anymore. He went into your room and played with it. What you do when you caught him, Mr. President, or do you want me to say so many cronies listening to this conversation? I've heard enough of you. You beat him near to death, Santa yelled. It was your own little brother, and you punched and blooded his face until and when he fell, you kicked and kicked and kicked. I was about to intervene myself, but thankfully your father heard the commotion and came and pulled you off him. Do you want to tell us what your father said after he got you off of him? No, I'll tell it then. He was so angry. I remember the snarl on his face as he loomed over his two boys and he pointed his finger angrily at your little brother and said, now, you know, not to touch your big brother's toys. That was the quote, right? He chastised your defenseless little brother who was lying there in a pool of his own blood, clutching broken ribs, and to you, the one who done the damage. He said nothing. The president was breathing heavily and didn't respond. That's why you never got another gift from me, Santa said angrily. And that's why when you ask me to trust your wisdom and how to help the world over my own, I'm picking myself every single time. Christmas is going to continue, and there's nothing you can do about it. Santa stabbed at the phone with his finger, ending the call. He stared at it for a long time, then stood up from the table. As he walked to the side door, Leah slowly followed, staying several steps behind. Santa paused and then pulled a pad and a pencil from his pocket. He turned and held it out to Leah. Write down the medications that Mark needs. She hesitated for a moment, then she did what he asked. It didn't seem to be the time to circle back to their previous disagreement, and besides, as much as she cared about everything else in this world, her husband needed his prescriptions. She finished writing them and handed it back to Santa. He pointed at the dining room table. If they call again, don't answer, he said. He turned away from her and walked over to the Christmas tree. He started to pick up the sack of gifts, then let out a huff and tipped it upside down. The gifts came tumbling onto the hazardous pile underneath the tree. Leah heard something shatter inside of one of the presents. Santa then threw the empty sack over his shoulder and left without saying another word. Christmas Day number 9. John had a bad feeling. It gnawed at his mind and caused to roll into his stomach. He looked out upon the snow-swept valley below, checking every possible mission parameter. The location was perfect. They knew that Santa flew through here every night. There wasn't anyone else for 100 miles, making a perfect kill box. He pulled his binos and brought them into his eyes, flicking them into night vision mode. Seeing no sight of his team, he changed to thermal imaging, still nothing. His men were invisible. Even though he couldn't see them, he knew exactly where they were hidden. He'd been given the authority to handpick his team. He brought in one of the best, a single 8-man squad, most deadly special forces operators under Uncle Sam's control. The president wasn't willing to risk this going sideways. He did a quick equipment check. Everything was tip top, ready to go. It just caused his anxiety to increase. He blindly wanted to do a radio check, get each member of the team to check their surroundings and their equipment, but they were operating radio silence. They couldn't take any chances that might tip Santa off, so John did his only thing he could. He waited and worried, laying on his stomach covered in snow. A few minutes later, he saw them. Zooming in with the binos, he watched the reindeer appear top of the mountain, then sleigh behind him, then started to level out over the valley. Right now, his forward team would be painting the sleigh with a targeting laser. A few miles away, a high-altitude aircraft would be firing a missile. John zoomed in further to his breath and caught his throat. His hand shot his collar, and he activated his comms. Abort, I repeat. Abort now. Santa's not in the sleigh, John yelled. A thousand shifting possibilities and calculations ran through his mind. If Santa wasn't in the sleigh, it meant that he knew he had been planning. And if he knew, then kaboom! The missile struck true, obliterating the sleigh and the reindeer. A massive fire lit up the sky where the sleigh had been a moment before. John looked away from the explosion, forcing his brain to return, running through the possibilities of what was happening. If Santa knew this was coming, then it was meant he couldn't plan an counterattack. A red-hot flash of adrenaline hit him all at once, and John used his hands to propel himself forward from his position. His sense movement behind him. Danger. He twisted as he moved forward, leaning on his back. Two elves were plunging swords, length-sharpened candy canes, into the snow right where John had been seconds before. They saw him at the same time, and they saw them. He pulled his sidearm with one hand, and he took the aim, and he fired twice, turning the elves on the right's head into a gory mess. The other elf was already on him, but instead of killing or going for a kill blow, it stabbed the candy cane into John's hand, forcing him to release the comms just before they could activate them. John tried to bring the pistol across his body, but the elf was fast, released his grip on the candy cane, and drove for John's gun.
It sunk its teeth into his hand, causing him to scream out and drop the pistol in the snow. Now that the little freak was on top of him, it freaked filled his nostrils. The fingers on his left hand weren't working, so he wrapped his whole arm around the elf's neck and wrenched back hand, forcing him to release his bite. He tried to clinch the choke in a choke, but it thrashed like a demon. After a few seconds, it broke, ripping out the grip sent trembling off of him and into the snow. John used the monumental opening to get to his feet. Blood was pouring from both of his hands, but he barely felt the wound. He rushed the elf, trying to use his superior size to come down from above, but the stickly looking creature was too fast and dove between his legs, landing on his stomach just a foot away from John's pistol. Whenever he found himself in a situation like this during the other combat encounters, John felt time slow to crawl. It was the same here. His mind played it all out, saw it before it happened. The elf would get the pistol, roll over onto its back, take aim, and fire. A few seconds, and John would be dead. But he also saw the counter move, the discarded candy cane sword. He grabbed it, turned around, and lunged it, driving it down through the elf's face, killing it before he could pull the trigger. John always knew the moves. It just came down to who could execute it faster, him or his enemy. After that, it happened in a blink of an eye, his hand closing around the hilt of candy cane sword, his blood causing to feel sick in his hand. The grunted of all effort took him around as he lunged for the elf. The hated filled look in the elf's eyes as it stared to raise the pistol. The squelching noise and unpop of the sharpened tip of candy cane pushed through the elf's eyeball and then through its brain. All of a sudden, stillness when the enemy was dead and John was still alive. In the distance, John heard screams and a low thump of a silenced gunshot, and then pulled him back to the moment and got to his feet. Looking across the valley, he saw muzzle flashes, red splash of blood against the white snow. His far hand reached across, evacuated on the comms. We need evac immediately. Repeat, evac on my location. He moved back to his original position, scooped up his rifle, and then started running towards the sounds of combat. The snow made it hard to run. He pushed hard anyway, his legs burning as he stepped across the valley monument. A few hundred feet, he caught an eye. Two elves coming his way. He knelt down, took aim. He squeezed the trigger, and moments later, a mist of brain matter and a blood shot out of the back of the first elf's head. The second elf froze. Sealing his fate, John's bullet caught the ray between the eye. Back on the move, John arrived to the position of his men who had been holding. The man was there face down in the red snow. Kneeling down, John saw that the soldier's neck had been cut. He got back to his feet, started moving towards the next position. In the distance, he saw a group of elves. They were retreating towards the mountain. John squeezed off a series of shots. They were too far. Looking through the scope, he saw several more elves, these ones already at the base of the mountain. It seemed that surviving characters were falling back. He pushed towards the next position, staying alert despite the lack of any more gunfire. The next member of his squad was dead too, but so were two elves that attacked him. It was the smallest of consolidation and one that would mean nothing to the man's family when they were informed of his death. The scene reported itself the next position. Dead soldier, dead elf, the one that was bleeding out. John stood over the mortality wounded elf, staring down with a content, and he put his foot to his neck and pressed down. It passed for a few seconds later. By the time help arrived, John finished the grim sweep of the valley. Four of his men were dead, and one was almost certain going to die en route to the base. It was the most casualties he ever run an operation, and a failed operation at that. People were talking to him, asking him questions, why, trying to direct him towards the helicopter. A medic trying to dress his wounded hands. But all John wanted to hear was one thing, reported over and over in his mind like a mantra: Santa Claus must die. Christmas Day number 10. Leah ran her hand through her hair, letting out a long sigh.
Unbelievable, she muttered. An elf had dropped down the chimney a few moments before. It dumped a gift and pile right out of the fireplace and then went back up the chimney. Staring at the pile of gifts, Leah could not believe how she began receiving Christmas gifts. Like some small child, voice in the back of her brain cried out her lots of excitement in getting presents, but she was much louder in the dull part of her brain, care less. Santa wasn't even trying anymore with the gifts. At last she opened a few generic and thoughtless, a towel, a notepad, white socks, too large at the house, junk, basically started the gifts, made her anxious. She asked, stop with the gifts, but was determined to do this. Glancing over the counter, Leah had reminded herself not to be too hard on Santa. The night before, the elf dropped off a surplus of medicine and medical supplies from Mark. Much of it was sitting on the counter. The closet is normally stored with full unopened Christmas presents. He'd also brought groceries enough to last several weeks. Something on the television caught the eye. The news of coming back from commercial. Leah grabbed the remote and unedited. As evidenced by a much stronger tone at the White House footage press secretary briefing today, here's footage. The scene switched from the White House briefing room to the camera zoomed on the reporter. Multiple sources are reporting explosions and the presence of military assets along Santa's route last night. Can you confirm these reports and shed the light on what happened in the situation? Happened there? The reporter asked. As I said at the beginning of my briefing, the White House will not commit any unsustained reports. What I can tell you is that the President and Secretary of Defense have spent all day in contact with our allies across the globe, and everyone agrees that the solution of Santa to the solution to the Santa problem is that the only priority at this point. I'm sorry, different reporter said. Are you suggesting that it's coronated? Knock, knock. Then Leah jumped and muted the TV, rushed over to the sword. The snow was coming down so heavy that she could barely see John standing there in his white camouflage. She stared at him for a long moment, complimentally leaving him outside, but finally she retained opening the door, stepped in and noticed right away that he had something different. Are you hurt? She said. His cut above his eye at her, seemingly appraising. Just cold, he said. Leah closed the door, then turned back around, looking at him up and down. She could see slight bruising on his face, even though he was wearing gloves, bandage on his hand. I know an injury when I see it, John. Seen enough of them staring back at my mirror, Leah said. It's not my first professional fight. My orbital bone got crushed. I lost my mouthpiece once. I got an uppercut so hard that I bit off a quarter of my tongue. She stuck her tongue out, showing the misshapen tongue. He shook his head. You really went downhill once we stopped dating, he said. Leah laughed, surprising herself and John. And then it was a quick moment, but a good one. Leah realized how long it had been since anything had made her laugh. The moment has gone, has arrived, though tough and intense silence replaced. Finally, Leah mentioned the couch. Do you want to sit? She asked. John shook his head no. It was hard to read the cold expression that had settled over his face. He was looking in on her direction, but his eyes weren't focused. Down to business, then, Leah asked. Something like that, John said. I'm going to take a wild guess and to say this about Santa Claus. His eyes snapped into focus, and the intensity of his stare sent a cold feeling through Leah. What, you want me to put him on the phone with the president again? Leah asked. John immediately responded, no, Leah, we want you to kill him. She stared at him for a long moment. She either misheard or he misspoke. She said, just waiting for him to correct the words that had come out of his mouth. The longer that he didn't, the tighter his lungs corrected, making it harder to breathe, and she felt her cheeks start to burn red. No one else could get close enough to do it, John said. Still, she could do what stared at him. Anger stared, building somewhere deep inside of her, growing more intense with every second that passed. John took a step forward, and Leah took a step away from him. Don't, she snapped, pointing a finger at him. John paused, holding his hands up in front of him. Take a deep breath. Just stop, Leah interrupted. She shook her head, then walked over to the couch and sat down. Tears were starting to well up in her eyes, which made her even angrier than she already was. She looked at John with a withering glare. I opened up to you. I shared things with you about my childhood that I haven't told anyone else beside my husband, Leah hissed. You know what Santa means to me. You know that I would never be here without him. To her deep frustration, tears escaped from the corner of her eye. I'm sorry, but it has to be you, Leah. It has to be done soon, John said. Poison You have poison that you need to mix into the protein shake and you make for him. That's it. That's all you need to do. Every time he spoke, he got madder. You're you're talking about killing Santa Claus. He's brought joy to the world for thousands of years, she yelled, her brain barely comprehending that it was not a real conversation. Now the flash of anger appeared in John's eyes. He's gone too far. Power grids in third world countries have already failed. If he doesn't let up with this blizzard, the world's first encounter power grid are less than 48 hours away from fail points. He paused and then let out a frustrating sigh before continuing. Every point I made for the first time we spoke about this only multiplied because every day this carries on, things get worse, exponentially worse. He refused to listen to the reasons, but two steps ahead of the military, which means we have to think outside the box to stop him. It took a moment for Leah to process what John had just said. As she started piecing it together, her eyes went to the television. They were showing a map of where the reported explosion in military assets had been the night before. She stood up with a point and, is this real? This was us? She asked angrily. Another second her brain put the final pieces. She looked at John's injuries, then stepped forward, pointing at him. This was you, she yelled. You idiots attacked Santa. He took several quick steps toward her, closing all the spaces between them. His eyes were wide, and Leah saw barely contained rage within. You don't know anything about it, John yelled. She never seen him lose control like that, but she stayed right there in front of his face, defiant. The two of them stared angrily at one another for a long time. Finally, John took a step back and then turned his back to her, took several deep breaths before asking, your country needs you too. Leah grabbed him by the arm and pulled him. Come with me, she said, interrupting him. John looked confused, but followed her as he pulled him deeper into the house. Her fingers dug deep into his arms, and then she led him up the stairs, finally releasing him as he stood in front of the bedroom door. She quietly opened it. She greeted by familiar soft beeps from Mark's medical equipment. She mentioned to John to come closer. He stepped beside her and looked in as Mark's asleep in his hospital bed, hooked up to his machines. Leah then moved over and noticed a bedroom door, quickly pushed it open. John walked over it, looking into Rosie's asleep in her bed. Leah closed the door and then quietly went back downstairs. John followed. Both of them were quiet for a while. That's why my answer is no, Leah said. You don't know anything about being a parent, about the lengths I would go to keep my daughter safe. My husband up there is 10 times the fighter than you or I am, 1,000 times more. He fights off death every minute of every day and not bringing a power struggle between the president and Santa Claus inside my house, putting these two people I care about most up there at risk. Wanting to be wanting to be certain that John understood, she walked over to him and stood right in front of him. Hear me on this, John. Make it clear when you repeat it to your masters. My answer is no. He stared at her for a long time and then finally snapped around her. Instead of heading for the exits, he moved toward the kitchen. Leah watched as John looked at the medicine and the supplies on the counter. He picked up some of it, reading the labels after he went into the fridge, and much to Leah's displeasure, he opened it, making a quiet noise as he saw how well stocked it was. John checked a few cabinets, seeing more food. Every move he made was slower and deliberate. Then he finally turned around and locked eyes with her. She forced her face to stay diligent and angry. He watched her for a long moment, then slowly walked back in her direction. He stopped a few feet and unnoticed. It must be nice being Santa's special pet. It took her a lot to stun her, but Leah felt stunned by his harsh words. She couldn't stop her mouth from falling open and hurt and anger, even shame, to show pain in her expression. John shook his head, then walked for the side door. She wanted to say something back, to throw some truth or insult his way, but her mind stayed blank. So she just watched him go. John pulled the door open, the howling wind, and paused. He paused there and looked back at her. You don't know him as well as you think you do, he said, then left. Wow. Whoa. That's a lot of whoa, that's a lot of book. Well, I'm just looking at here. There's like 127 pages. Mm-hmm. So 127 pages. So they go. Wow. No, I'm just looking at. I'm just looking at. You know how many. How many. Yeah, because we're at Christmas Day 11. Yeah, and we're an hour and 51 minutes into the thing here. So I'm going to take a break, and we're going to start back up on Christmas Day 11 tomorrow, because that's where we're going to go to. So I'm going to put a thing in here. So reading this book so far, I've realized to myself that I can read. I've never been able to read a book so well, and I like it. It's a very good book, and it has a lot of good statements. I mean, it has a lot of good points. I mean, there's a lot of things that we would wonder. What would we do if Christmas would last this long, or what would we do? So anyway, I'm going to stop the stream, and I just want to let you guys know that I've had a good time reading the book, and I'll read a little bit more of it tomorrow. So you guys have a good one.